We are so excited to welcome you back to session 3 of the American Innovation and Abundance Stream. So count yourselves amongst the lucky. You are here and getting ready to make it happen. So this chapter of our abundance agenda and the conversation is about capacity. So we've talked big picture, we've talked to innovators, climate investors. Now we're looking at the machinery that actually makes it happen. So, at Climate Group North America, we've been really thinking a lot about that gap. So what is the narrative that we need in such a, shall we say, changing time? and how do we adapt, knowing that, honestly, every single day we have leaders who are taking steps forward, who are using their resources in positive directions and really multiplying their impact. But government is a really critical piece of that. So session 3 is really going to be focused on the governance capacity to deliver. So who are the people? There are policy leaders, legal innovators, local officials. They're not really in the conversation of are we, should we, what has to happen. They're talking about designing projects. They're talking about permitting structures. They're talking about finance and speeding up implementation. As part of this, you're also going to play a very important role for this session. So congratulations to you guys. You didn't even know. You are the live audience of a taping of the Sirens podcast. So that's also going to be a part of this conversation. You're going to hear from Carol Browner, who of course has many titles, but is our former and longest serving EPA Administrator, Jordan Diamond, president of ELI, and Vice Mayor Nancy Metayer Bowen. And there will all be in conversation with the incredible Loren Schulman on how we rebuild national capacity from the ground up. Please welcome them to the stage now.
Hello, everybody. My name is Loren DeJonge Schulman. Welcome to a taping of Sirens, which is a podcast. They used to be called Bombshell. Now it's Sirens, a Bombshell production. In Sirens, we dig into some really awesome, super nerdy issues. The institutions of American power, which we define as the hidden gears behind the scenes on national security, on governance institutions, on technology, all of the things that we think shape our democracy, that are behind the headlines. All the issues that the insiders want to know about, the things that we care about day to day, but are not necessarily getting the big flashy stuff. Which it raises a good question. Why on earth am I here today? Because we want to turn that lens of the institutions of American power on climate action. I get to be here because I am a longtime champion of government capacity. All of the behind-the-scenes stuff in terms of government management, talent, performance, evidence, process, all of the above that in theory, makes government work, often makes government not work very well, but we'll get to that in a second. Right now, my view is that government capacity, and particularly the ability to engender trust amongst the American people, both the most overlooked engine of climate progress, but also maybe the most broken engine of climate progress. I am pretty sure, however, that Americans both want their government to work. They want it to be agile. They want it to be responsive. They want their taxes to be easier to file. They want somebody to answer the phone when they call Social Security, but they also want government to be able to act on big existential complex issues like climate. And they want that in a whole lot of ill-defined ways, and we're going to define them a little bit more in detail today. And one of the challenges that we'll get into is that all of the amazing ideas we've been talking about today, the big ambitious laws, amazing technology, big new policy design, all of that is incredible. And none of it works hardly at all unless you've got that government capacity behind the scenes, which most people don't think about, to actually make sure it can deliver. So we're going to try to marry those conversations today in ways that we normally don't. So we're going to get super nerdy and dorky. If you're not up for that, just quietly exit. But if you are, please feel to chime in and cheer, whatever you need to do. Upfront secret that I want to be on the table for a discussion that I think most of the paths for real, genuine climate action have to run through deep institutional and systems reform in our governance systems. And if we do that, we open up from a super narrow, very annoying, fickle path to a huge, wide, amazing path. But we have to think about those institutions, if not first, then a part of a parallel package. And to unpack this, I've got 3 superstars, 3 winners with me today. Carol Browner, who I don't need to introduce, but I will anyway, Carol Browner, who is a former EPA Administrator, White House Climate Advisor, and all-around amazing human. Jordan Diamonds, who is the president of the Environmental Law Institute, and Nancy Metayer Bowen, who is the vice mayor of Coral Springs, Florida. And we're going to talk about how all the nerdy stuff I talked about, how federal ambition meets local reality, what it takes to build durable trust between communities and institutions, and that one secret fix, that BuzzFeed list of what we would do to make right now to make sure climate progress keeps moving in terms of government capacity. So I will stop talking at you real quick for a little bit, not for long, and then turn my first question over to Carol. Wow. Okay. So I'm going to ask you both the biggest, most complex question, but also the simplest one. You have navigated regulatory leadership EPA. You've been at the highest levels of the White House. You have done a million things in your career. And so I'm going to do the looking back. What's the one cool thing? Looking back, what lesson stands out to strengthen government capacity so that big, amazing, ambitious laws like the Inflation Reduction Act actually deliver results on the ground? What's the one cool thing, or maybe a couple cool things that we should be focusing on?
I think the most important thing is flexibility. Yeah. And the government can be very rigid. And I certainly had my share of rigidity running EPA for 8 years. It was always about getting to a sharp yes or a sharp no. But flexibility. And what do I mean when I say that? I mean, let's put everyone at the table. Let's have a conversation. Intel, back in the news now, came to us when I was at EPA and said, we can't get a permit fast enough to stay competitive in the global market for chips. It just changes so rapidly. And so is there any way we could make the changes to sort of notify? I'm like, well, that doesn't quite work. But we sat together, we sat with the community, and we realized that what we could do is get them to significantly reduce their emissions below what their permit allowed for. So they'd be well below your neighborhood gas station, in exchange for which they would get an after-the-fact permit. So it was a win-win for everybody. The community got something. They got less pollution. Intel got the business flexibility that they needed, and EPA got the regulatory assurances that it needed. And so I think we need to be flexible. It's hard to do in the government. People don't always want the government to be flexible, but I think it is probably the most important thing we can do. I will say, as a former regulator, and we're sort of talking about the role of regulations, it's important to remind people what regulations do. They create certainty. They tell the regulated industry and what to do. They also create opportunity for American innovation, because with every regulation generally comes the need for some sort of new answer, some new technology. And I can just look across my 8 years at EPA and look at all of the technologies that emerged in response to the regulations we were putting in place. Another round of catalytic converters, the list goes on. And so I think when we hear negatives about the role of government and regulation, we should remind people what it does: business certainty and create opportunity for innovation and investment.
Jordan, before I get to your question, I want you to jump in on this point of flexibility, because one of the challenges I experience in government is often that we have some amazing, incredible lawyers, and they are so good at finding beautiful ways to say no, and not nearly as good at finding amazing ways to say yes and let's talk about this a little bit more. So this is what you spend a lot of your life on. Can you build on Carol's point a little bit on this point on flexibility, and how can government reset itself so that it can embrace that?
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite topics. So I think there is, right? There's flexibility is a really tough word for a lot of people, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's a question of how do you actually achieve your goal? And also we're dealing with a lot of issues about trust right now, whether that's in institutions, whether that's a kind of across sectors, et cetera. So there is an element of needing to build trust so that you can have flexible processes. But I think there's also just a key element of timing here. How do you make sure things move faster while not sacrificing your goals, right? And so I'm a process wonk. When asked about doing this podcast, as soon as Loren said nerdy, I was in, right? It's fantastic. Okay? But there are ways where we can build in, my opinion, being more explicit about what we're actually making a decision. And I think that's where we often go awry. We start throwing a ton of information and a ton of things into it without actually being upfront and candid about what are the trade-offs that we're explicitly making to actually come to a decision. So I think there is a lot of trust building, a lot of making sure that we are being damn concise about the information to actually make processes being they can tailor, then they can be flexible, and that they can.
Fun
Can I
fact.
just add something? I think Jordan made a really important point. We frequently it's that
podcast is
we
over.
have to have a shared vision of where we're going, and you get that by listening to each other. I mean, we would find out at Superfund sites, yes, the neighborhood was angry that the site wasn't cleaned up, but they also wanted, better access to community opportunities. And so bridging that gap, having that conversation and that shared vision allowed you to find a more cost-effective cleanup plan.
I actually, with that point on listening, I want to bring in Nancy because Nancy is local leader in Florida. One of my big hashtag life goals right now is to get people to talk more about what is it that people genuinely want from government? What is it that, and asking it that way would probably get blank stares, but there's better ways to ask the question. But on the ground, when people are dealing with the worst moments of their lives, the most stressful, or the ones that are most exciting, what do they genuinely want from government? So building on this in a climate perspective, you have been on the front lines of climate resilience and environmental justice and so much more. I'd like to hear more about your perspective of what it looks like, what government capacity, this like overall lens of government capacity. What does it look like when you're facing hurricanes or flooding or housing pressures? When people are thinking about what do I want from government in that moment, what do they really need?
They want government to show up. And my co-panelists nailed it, trust. We can't continue to show up for community if we don't live up to the end of the bargain. They pay taxes into a system with expectations that we are going to show up for them. And I heard trust up here frequently. It is super important when we talk about local government that we're building trust. We're the closest to the people. We know what their needs are. I live in the great free state of Florida, pun intended, where in actuality, when we're trying to build that trust, we continue to be preempted from doing what our residents has asked us to do, not showing up for them. When we have a hurricane and a severe weather event, they want us to show up for them in a way that they can pay their rent on time. They have public transit to get to where they need to prepare for the storm, to weather for the storm, that they have access to affordable housing. And these are all issues that are not siloed. They are directly connected to climate change. We have individuals who want us to stand up to developers when they're being pushed out of a high leveled area. Climate gentrification is very real in South Florida. They want us to be able to support them and show up for them and advocate for them, even when our federal government doesn't show up, hence FEMA, when our state government decides to direct funds to other opportunities. And so it is our job as local electeds to ensure that we continue to provide access to individuals in the room so they can share their stories, amplify their short stories, and feel empowered and hold us to the fire, our feet to the fire, and making sure that we're doing our due diligence. When we talk about capacity, it is super important. We don't have the capacity, and it's super important that we lean on CBOs, community-based organizations, to help fill in those gaps. I want to amplify and echo ICLEI, who provides that technical support when it comes to our sustainability office. I am proud to say that I created the first sustainability office in my municipality, hired the first sustainability staff, but we are a team of 1.5. So what happens when we need to move towards a more efficient and divest from fossil fuel, and we do not have that technical support. So we rely on organizations like ICLEI, organizations like FLIC, who come in and provide that support we need when we don't have capacity.
Nancy, I love so many things about your answer, but one at the top is we could admire the problem of low trust in government for hours. That could be the entire session. We could do 7 sessions after it. You immediately had specifics around here's how, here's why, to what end we actually think about rebuilding trust. And trust is so important for all kinds of reasons. But to me, in the climate world, it's so important because it relies on Climate action relies on long-term solutions. It relies on the faith that if you invest today, it's going to have impact for when it matters at a certain point in time. And Jordan, I want to ask, you have spent so much time in your career around building inclusive and accountable governance, which is critical for trust. And Nancy talked about the importance of what local institutions could do. And I would love if you could build on how do we bring lawyers and civic institutions and into this ecosystem to help, not just to bring them in, but how do we get them to be part of that trust building conversation?
I think there's building trust, like in our day-to-day lives, building trust isn't a mystery, right? How do you build trust with someone? You make sure that you give reliable information. You don't ghost them. You admit when you make a mistake, and you don't turn into someone else, right? Okay, we need to make sure that you're actually being upfront and sharing the information I kind of already referred to, that you're actually giving the information that you're making a decision on. You're going to make mistakes, and you just own them, right? There's no hiding a mistake doesn't help. We're people, we're intelligent, and it doesn't help. So just be upfront when you make a mistake. Don't, that just kind of goes into the don't hiding, right? Don't ghost them, don't disappear. And there's only so much you can do about not turning into someone else, but it does get to the fact that these are relationships between people, right? Any particular process, although I have had many conversations that I later find out is with the chatbot, but other than that, most of the time, you're actually just developing a relationship with a person, right? You're not with a position, it's an actual person there. And so there is an element of really being aware of that and really trying to minimize the change in the system. That being said, sounds very contradictory, but I do think one of the challenges with our system is that we're not quick to adapt. When we see something going wrong, even if we can admit that, our processes do not have built-in mechanisms for saying, whoops, we messed that up, let's tweak it, right? You kind of start over. And that's really, really detrimental to the process, whether it's inclusion, you can go down the list. That hurts every step of the process. So we have to build better learning into our legal system. I have my youngest turned 6 on Saturday, and I play a game with him, right, where we ask, you earn a point for every mistake you make, right? And in life, you learn from mistakes, right? And he gets a point because that, and I do it too. Mom earns more coins than he does. But that's how you learn. That's like the exciting part of it, right? So I want him to have a positive association. But with most of our laws and most of our processes, that's seen as a negative. If you messed up, it was a failure. So you don't keep going, you throw that out and you start anew. That, I think, is one of the biggest impediments to speed in our process, is we have to be able to say, whoops, we didn't realize that was going to happen. We adjust and we keep going.
Carol, I'd love if you could build on this, because you brought up the importance of flexibility. And to me, one of the underlying factors around flexibility is trust. Like, you get the ability to adjust, to start over again, to recognize mistakes when you work in a trusted system. When you don't work in a trusted system, you have all kinds of incentives to slow down, to not admit mistakes and move otherwise. You have seen this world from multiple perspectives, whether it be from policy, from business, from environmental protection. How do you think we can better address this question of flexibility? Like, what are some of the bottlenecks that you think we can actually address head on, and that actually will not create some of the risks that we might see around removing some of those bottlenecks? And how do you do so in a way that continues to engender trust in the system?
Totally agree. You admit your mistakes. Hugely important. You also should admit what you know and what you don't know. And, there are lots of issues that we deal with where we have a lot of information. The policymaker may have enough information to make a decision, but you may not have all the information, and that's okay. And so being honest with people about, here's what we know, here's what we may learn, but here's what we're not likely to learn in the near term, but we still need to sort of make progress. I think that's important. And I think to go back to Nancy's point, inclusion, you got to put everybody at the table, and you have to be candid with people. It feels like we could all do with some listening, right? There's a lot of talking past each other, a lot of, I think, misunderstanding that occurs because we're not taking the time to actually listen. And I'll go back to the Superfund example, when we would talk to a community and they might say, you know what, we need playgrounds for our kids, right? That meant we should tailor a cleanup plan that made sure that soil in that playground was safe because children were going to be there. Another community might say to us, we want a parking garage. We don't have enough on-street parking. You tailor a cleanup plan that doesn't involve hauling out all of the soil because you're going to bury it under 10, whatever inches of concrete. So hearing what it is that the community wants and then allowing them to see that the government is actually being responsive, I think goes a long ways towards building trust. I just want to take a moment as a fellow Floridian. I'm from South Florida too, a long time ago. Nancy, you give me faith that Florida will make it. It's a tough journey for Florida, but the fact that there are elected officials like you is just really...
Thank you so much, Carl. Before we started, I told Carol I was fangirling. I was like, I can't wait. Oh my goodness, I admire her so much. So
no, but like that you stood up and ran for office, that should give us all faith that there are people out there prepared to do this.
Thank you so much.
All right, Nancy, now that we've delivered, or you've had these compliments delivered, now you get to show your wish list of, so let me start that question over and move step back a little bit. I think too often people like me tend to think of government, the broader public sector as like, well, we have federal, we have state, we have local, we have civic institutions, and they're all very distinct and they operate in specific ways. And this is just one mishmash of an ecosystem. We are all doing our best trying to figure out how we operate together. But it is a really key question to me that I'd love to hear from you on the kinds of support, whether it be financial, regulatory, technical, morale, whatever it is, that you think local governments really need the most from their federal and state partners in order to help deliver those kinds of equitable, resilient solutions we've been talking about. And I know it varies a lot from administration to administration, but what is it that would matter the most from your community?
If I had my wish, I would just love a debit card that says, here you go, cha-ching, do all the things that you can. But
that's at the top of the next IRA. And then after that.
But no, all seriously, being quite serious, I think it's super important when the government does give us funds. There is not a, hey, this is what's going to basically making it hard for us to report back. When you have issues, no community is the same. And I feel like when you're on a federal and state government, they think all local communities look and act the same. Our communities have very different needs. They have very different wants, and we need to act as if we give you these dollars, if you're within the scope, you're executing within what you're supposed to be doing, then have at it. Do what you know is best for your community. But when you have state and local government that encroaches on us, preempts us, it really limits us from what we can really do. A great example, ARPA dollars really helped with our infrastructure. We use those dollars to really invest in our stormwater infrastructure to help mitigate flooding and salt intrusion, which is something that is impacting our drinking water. When we talk about federal dollars and what it means to really support our community who needs affordable housing, our CBDG grant dollars help our seniors. They help us create 13 new affordable units in our community and say, hey, they don't fall within that MIA, but because we had a land trust, we were able to use our CBDG dollars to ensure that our firefighters can come in because they're a little bit over that threshold. Yep. And they are able to thrive in our community. When we ask our government to allow us to be flexible around our ARPA dollars, around funding, we are able to invest in our local pantries, and they're able to give back in our community in a way that we're able to multiply. And so I'm asking our state and local federal government to stop impeding on what we know works in our communities and just let us do our jobs.
So I want to translate that into as we say, GovCap, government capacity language for a minute, because that was incredible. That was exactly what is invaluable for people to hear in terms of like, what is it we really need? So to me, that means that Congress needs to better write outcomes-based legislation. It means that federal civil servants need to feel as though they are trusted to deliver outcomes rather than have to face a compliance mindset. It means that we have procurement and grantee processors who are looking for that outcome, that result, rather than looking for the box check. And it means we need lawyers who are looking for that flexibility in the reporting system. And we need to find ways to hear and learn and measure from communities that are very different than the ways we do now, and about 30,000 other things. But like, that'll get the list started. We've got time for one more question, and we'll just ties all of this together. So just building on Nancy's point here, like, as we are in a moment right now where climate rules, climate resources, climate energy, well, maybe not energy. Energy today is incredible. Climate rules and resources are being scaled back or curtailed or limited. What do you think is the single most important step local governments or their partners could take in the next year to keep climate progress going? So one single step that they could take that would be most important to keep this going right now. And Jordan, I'll start with you.
Well, not being in local government, my opinion carries a lot of weight. But I will say we talk a lot about not changing what we're doing, right? Which there are the absolute capacity and like funding risk constraints and et cetera. But in general, I think there's often, when faced with a challenge, right, you're trying to be like, okay, well, let me try something totally different. And we're trying to help provide assistance and capacity so that people can keep moving forward. That we all know kind of the pendulum swing conversations and how challenging that is. Carol, you referred to certainty earlier and how impossible it is to get long-term solutions in place without some expectation of certainty, even if it's not perfect. And so it is a question of what can all the rest of us do to support local governments so they can just keep moving forward?
Great answer. Nancy?
That's a great answer. It's hard to go after that. But
you can add to your wish list. Keep going.
But the rest of the nation is new to this. Florida has been dealing with this for quite some time now. And what we've been able to do is get really creative with wording. And so while you are trying to wordsmith what to keep out of grants, what not to do, we've been able to switch wording around and also embedding it into ordinances. It's really hard if it's already a local ordinance to undo that. And so I think this is a great way for folks to move forward. Lean on your local government because they're the closest to the people, and then that you are able to make more strides on a local level than on a state and federal.
Carol, last one.
I'm going to go really big picture here.
Do it.
But it starts at the local government.
Yep.
Vote. The single most important thing we can do right now to preserve progress on climate will be to vote in the next round of elections. And what that means, I think, for local government is ensuring that voters have the opportunity to participate in our democratic, small d, democratic process. And I think there's going to be lots of efforts to try and somehow or another keep people from the polls. And we have to make sure that everybody who wants to vote is informed, is educated, and is able to exercise that right to vote.
These are all amazing answers. We have just a couple minutes left, so I'm going to close this out. First, by doing something I never get to do when I'm taping a podcast, I want to ask for a huge round of applause for our amazing guests. It's really validating. Maybe I should do this more often. Yeah, exactly. So Carol, Nancy, Jordan, this was wonderful. Thank you so much. If you have not listened to Sirens before, I highly recommend. There's several podcasts called Sirens. This one is called Sirens, a Bombshell production. Secret sauce, only 3 women as hosts, only women as guests. Just saying, it's got some appeal there. I want to give some homework to everyone in the audience, and then I will let you get some coffee. I know after lunch it's a little much. As I said at the beginning, I think that real climate progress doesn't just depend on your amazing big ideas, though. Thank you. Amazing big ideas. Keep them coming. It depends on all of us insisting that reforms to a government be capable of delivery, that government is actually showing up, that it is listening, that it is there at the hardest moments and the most positive, and that we invest in government as though it's able and capable of delivering in that way. So I want you all to do that, to dream big. To be very loud as you were a minute ago, in demanding that we strengthen government capacity and that you continue to believe that is the work that makes everything possible. So, like with all that, thank you so much for being here. Let's do one more round of applause because I can, as for a podcast. Thank you.